WNBA players is using Caitlin Clark hype as a negotiation tactic for the CBA negotiation.
The WNBA is embroiled in controversy again, but not because of a game. A significant storm is now brewing behind closed doors, as former players face accusations of using Caitlin Clark's fame and popularity to push for increased money, better benefits, and even personal perks.
Caitlin Clark hype ain't as big as it was. We all could agree on that. But something we all did not expect was the WNBA negotiations to actually use Caitlin Clark hype as leverage for former players.
What began as a simple dialogue on league improvements has escalated into a fierce debate over who truly deserves the fruits of Caitlin's success, with current and past players clashing over recognition and revenue. A single question now cuts through the noise: is Caitlin Clark's impact being celebrated, or is it being exploited?
They're trying to use Caitlin Clark hype to generate revenue for former players that played before them. What the like, y'all realize y'all ain't even getting money now like that.
The entire controversy ignited on an episode of the WNBA podcast, Full Circle, hosted by Lexi Brown and another former player. What began as a casual conversation about league issues rapidly escalated into a heated revelation that left fans utterly stunned. The host candidly discussed upcoming CBA negotiations and hinted that Caitlin Clark's popularity was becoming a key bargaining chip.
In this podcast, they spoke about the charter flights. And we know when Caitlin Clark first got there, within 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks of Caitlin Clark getting drafted, they got these damn charter flights. I mean, Kathy wasted no time. Hey, look, we finna get y'all these charter flights, and we finna get y'all better hotels. Boom, 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 boom. Wasted no time, right?
They detailed the abrupt and significant improvements in travel conditions, the newly minted multi-billion-dollar television rights deal, and how all of it seemed to materialize almost immediately after Caitlin entered the league. The undertone of their discussion was anything but subtle. They were suggesting that this new wave of unprecedented attention could finally be leveraged to secure better pay and more comprehensive benefits for all players, a category that included both current and past athletes.
Quickly after that, literally within, I'll say 6 months, they get a new a TV rights deal, $2 billion TV rights deal out of left field like that. So the NBA was negotiating their current TV rights deal. Now, Adam Silver, being the smart businessman that he is, thought it'd be very profitable to, you know what, we're just going to throw the WNBA into our TV rights negotiation. Now, they never done this before. Now, boom, he got the WNBA $2 billion. Now, he simply did that because of who? Caitlin Clark.
For a large segment of the fan base, that single statement was the spark that ignited the entire firestorm. Instead of celebrating the league's progress, it sounded as though some former stars were preparing to cash in on the immense popularity of someone else. Caitlin Clark's name, once a potent symbol of hope for the future of women's basketball, was suddenly being tossed around as if it were mere currency for contentious negotiations.
Yes, Caitlin Clark is the reason they got the $2 billion TV rights deal. And now they want to use Caitlin Clark as leverage to get former WNBA players to just swear up and down. To just swear to God is better than Caitlin Clark. I mean, they swear these players. Your Cheryl Seuss, your Diana Taurasi, your Maya Morse. All these players, y'all swear is better than Caitlin, right? Well, if they was so much better than Caitlin, shouldn't they had already been getting their fair share of money? Like, y'all can't use Caitlin Clark hype.
The podcast also brought to light several uncomfortable realities concerning the league's financial structure. Lexi Brown mentioned that, in the past, players were frequently required to share hotel rooms, fly on commercial airlines, and even conduct their practices in gyms located adjacent to ongoing Zumba classes.
I remember my first 3 years in the league, we were still flying commercial. We were sharing hotel rooms like we were in college, and that was just the norm. Like, that's just, that's what we expected when you had a dream of being the WNBA. You talk to other players, And they were very transparent about, okay, guys, like, this is not going to be like college. Like, you're back at the airports. You might have to share a room if you're a rookie. And, you know, we were just all like, yeah, the W, like, it's our dream. Like, I don't care. Like, whatever. Like, I've always wanted to play the WNBA.
These stark, vivid details painted a clear picture of struggle, but they also raised some pointed questions. If conditions were truly that dire before, why did the league or its veteran players fail to enact significant changes any earlier? Fans online were quick to seize upon this palpable tension. Social media threads exploded with a torrent of comments, accusing certain players of jealousy and a sense of entitlement. Others rushed to their defense, arguing that the system has always chronically undervalued women's sports and that Caitlyn's fame simply intensified the spotlight. But the underlying tone was unmistakable. People were angry that the very same figures who had once seemingly ignored the league's glaring flaws were now using Caitlin Clark's name to demand more for themselves. And that is precisely when the backlash truly began.
That wasn't negotiated in our CBA, the charter flights. Cappy kind of was just like, here, charter flights. So that's something that we also have to renegotiate in our CBA.
Kathy wasn't like that. Adam Silver got y'all those damn charter flights. See, Caitlin Clark got y'all those. There's no like here. No, that ain't how it worked, bruh.
Caitlin Clark never asked to be the face of a league's financial revolution, yet here she is, her name being invoked in every boardroom, podcast, and press release intrinsically tied to the WNBA's future. When Clark entered the league, everything seemed to shift overnight. Within a mere 2 weeks of her arrival, charter flights were introduced, media attention exploded, and ticket sales shattered long-standing records. Soon after, a massive $2 billion TV rights deal was negotiated under Adam Silver's watchful eye, a move that analysts assert was largely influenced by Clark's immense popularity and market value. But instead of being a moment of profound unity, that success became a stark dividing line. Many players, especially veterans, began to view Clark's presence as a form of leverage. Some argued that if she could attract record-breaking audiences and new sponsorships, then the league as a whole deserved a bigger slice of the pie, a category that included those who had paved the way before her. Others, however, perceived it as a shameless attempt to ride the wave of a single player's success while offering very little in return. The problem is that Caitlyn's rise was not just about basketball, it was about timing, culture, and a unique connection with a new audience. She brought in a completely new demographic of fans, many of whom had never watched a single WNBA game before. That massive influx of interest created undeniable revenue, but it also created a palpable sense of resentment among players who had been grinding for years without ever receiving the same level of spotlight. Former legends like Diana Taurasi and Cheryl Swoops were suddenly being mentioned in heated debates about fairness and legacy. Should they receive new benefits simply because Caitlyn drew in new sponsors, or does that fundamentally undermine the work she has done to elevate the sport in the present day? The discussion quickly morphed into a power struggle between generations, with one side claiming they built the foundation and the other side arguing that they finally made people care. As the tensions began to spread across the entire league, it became abundantly clear that Caitlin Clark was not just a player anymore. She had become a symbol, one that everyone wanted a piece of, whether she liked it or not. The idea of honoring those who came before is not in itself controversial. Every single league celebrates its pioneers. But the problem that has now emerged is the tone. The way that former WNBA players are framing their demands feels less like a matter of respect and more like a matter of resentment. On the Full Circle podcast, Lexi Brown and others spoke about improving healthcare, pensions, and travel benefits for retired athletes. On paper, that sounds perfectly fair. In practice, however, many fans felt that they were using Caitlin Clark's achievements as a shortcut to gain perks they were never promised. It is one thing to push for progress, but it is another thing entirely to build your entire case on someone else's success. That is what rubbed people the wrong way. Clark did not negotiate the TV deal. She did not approve the charter flights. She simply played her game and in doing so, ignited a cultural wave that the league could no longer ignore. Yet suddenly her popularity is being used as the moral justification for a series of retroactive rewards. What made matters even worse was the palpable tone of entitlement that permeated some of these conversations. Instead of expressing gratitude for the new attention being brought to the league, there was a sense of frustration that it had not arrived sooner. Some veterans argued that they walked so Caitlyn could run, but that sentiment statement did not land well with a fan base that saw it as dismissive and bitter. Social media erupted with replies, asking why these same players had not managed to attract viewers or sponsors during their time in the league, if they were truly being so overlooked. Meanwhile, current players find themselves caught in the middle. They appreciate what Clark has brought to the sport, but they also know that speaking up about fairness can make them the targets of intense online backlash. The locker room unity that once seemed to exist is now showing visible cracks, and the timing could not be worse. With CBA negotiations rapidly approaching, what started as a debate about fair compensation has now evolved into something far more personal, a fight over credit, relevance, and recognition. And instead of uniting around Caitlyn's impact, the league seems to be dividing itself deeper than ever before. Behind closed doors, the collective bargaining agreement talks are no longer just about salaries or travel upgrades. They have become a full-blown power struggle between the past, the present, and the future of the WNBA. Former players want pensions, healthcare, and recognition for their sacrifices. Current players want stability, transparency, and better working conditions. And the executives, they are walking a precarious tightrope, knowing that every single demand now echoes through the media, thanks in large part to Caitlin Clark's immense influence. League insiders say that the WNBA Players Association is using Clark's cultural momentum as its ace card in the ongoing negotiations. They are pointing to the skyrocketing ticket sales, TV ratings, and sponsorship deals as definitive proof that the players deserve more. But there is a twist. Many of those impressive numbers are directly and inextricably tied to Caitlyn's personal brand, not necessarily to a league-wide growth. The fear among the owners and the league officials is that once her initial hype inevitably slows down, the financial promises being made today could very well collapse tomorrow. That pervasive fear has made the negotiations incredibly tense. Sources say that league executives are frustrated with how public the entire discussion has become. Instead of having private, constructive talks about structure and revenue sharing, players are now openly discussing their demands on podcasts and in social media posts. That has effectively turned public opinion into a weapon, and for many it is backfiring. Fans who once wholeheartedly supported the WNBA's growth now feel alienated by what appears to be internal greed and mismanagement. Some accuse former players of hijacking Clark's popularity to rewrite history, while others think that the league's leadership is manipulating her image to deflect blame. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in between, a clash of generations, of pride, and of raw survival instincts. At the heart of it all is a simple, undeniable reality. Caitlin Clark's name now carries more negotiating power than any WNBA executive or franchise owner. And that power is dangerous, because once it is unleashed in the wrong context, it ceases to be a source of inspiration and instead becomes a form of ammunition. The next phase of this battle would expose just how profoundly divided the league truly is.
The moment that clips from the Full Circle podcast hit the internet, social media transformed into a veritable battlefield. Fans flooded the comment sections, accusing former players of jealousy and hypocrisy. Threads on X and Reddit were filled with palpable frustration. These women were exploiting Caitlin Clark's success to chase a paycheck they couldn't earn when they were active. One user wrote, "Memes began to spread with astonishing speed. Images that juxtaposed the packed arenas during Caitlin's games with the half-empty stands of previous seasons. The message was brutal but clear. Clark had changed the game, and others were just trying to ride her wave. But not everyone agreed. Some fans and journalists defended the veterans, arguing that women's basketball has always struggled with unfair pay and poor infrastructure, and that Caitlin's fame simply gave them the leverage they needed to demand long overdue reforms. To them, this was not greed. It was a strategy. They saw it as the perfect time to use the media spotlight to fix decades of financial neglect. Still, the online tone was overwhelmingly negative. People pointed out that instead of uniting around Caitlin's momentum, the former players were actively dividing the fan base. Many viewers who had just started following the league because of Clark now felt betrayed, claiming that this internal drama was turning off potential new supporters. Even casual fans began to question whether the WNBA was capable of handling success without tearing itself apart. The chaos did not stop there. Influencers, analysts, and even former NBA players began to weigh in, with many calling the WNBA's infighting an act of self-sabotage. One viral comment said, "Caitlin's building
the house and everyone else is arguing over who gets the biggest bedroom. That single line alone perfectly summed up how public perception had shifted from a place of empathy to one of complete exhaustion. What should have been a moment of unity for women's basketball had instead become a storm of finger-pointing and frustration, and instead of addressing the backlash, the WNBA's leadership remained conspicuously silent, allowing the narrative to spiral completely out of their control. The damage to their public image was already done. While the public drama raged on online, a quieter but more calculated struggle was unfolding behind the scenes. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, the man who had quietly bundled the WNBA into the NBA's new $2 billion TV rights deal, was now watching the chaos unfold from the sidelines. Insiders say that Silver never intended for Caitlin Clark's name to become the centerpiece of a negotiation war. His primary goal was to stabilize the league financially, not to ignite a civil war within it. When the deal was initially struck, Silver believed that merging the NBA and WNBA's broadcast rights would finally give the women's league the consistent exposure it so desperately needed. What he did not expect was how quickly Caitlin's stardom would come to overshadow everything else. In just a matter of months, she became the most talked about athlete in all of women's basketball, boosting ratings but also exposing the deep cracks within the league's leadership. Silver's frustration reportedly stems from how the WNBA's front office, led by Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, has handled this unprecedented surge in attention. Instead of building long-term marketing strategies around Clark's influence, Engelbert's administration has been forced into a state of constant damage control, dealing with everything from locker room jealousy to veteran resentment to podcast controversies. The instability makes sponsors nervous, and that could very well affect future deals that are tied to the NBA's joint negotiations. Behind closed doors, sources claim that Silver and other NBA executives are urging the WNBA to get its internal politics under control. They see Caitlin as a rare, once-in-a-generation opportunity to bridge the gap between mainstream audiences and corporate backing, but that chance could very well evaporate if the league continues to allow its players to weaponize her success. The irony is sharp. A TV deal that was meant to unite the sport is now actively dividing it. The very person who was meant to uplift the WNBA is now being dragged into internal battles she never even started. And while Silver keeps his public statements measured and diplomatic, those who are close to the situation say that one thing is clear: he is losing his patience, and he is losing it fast. What happens next might very well decide how much control the WNBA truly has over its own future. Inside the locker rooms and the board meetings, the tension has become impossible to ignore. Younger players who entered the league after Caitlin Clark's arrival are currently riding a wave of unprecedented excitement with new sponsorships and packed arenas, but the veterans, especially those who have been grinding for years without ever receiving that kind of exposure, now feel overshadowed. It is not just about fame anymore. It is about identity, power, and who gets to define the future of women's basketball. Insiders have described a clear divide that is forming between the new era and the old guard. On one side are the rising stars like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Cameron Brink, athletes who understand that a strong social media presence, personal branding, and fan engagement are just as important as the stats on the court. On the other side are the veterans who came up in a time when exposure was minimal and financial stability was a rarity. To them, the intense spotlight on Clark feels like a shortcut they never had, and some of them simply cannot hide their frustration. This divide is not only emotional, it is also financial. Current players are seeing endorsement offers, NIL-style sponsorships, and brand deals that older players could only have dreamed of. That imbalance is now pushing some veterans to demand that a portion of this new wealth be redistributed toward retired players. But critics argue that it is not Clark's job, nor is it her generation's responsibility, to fix decades of systemic underpayment. Even within the Indiana Fever, players have reportedly noticed the mounting pressure. Some appreciate what Caitlin has brought to the team: visibility, excitement, and real fans in the seats. Others quietly admit that they are tired of her name being attached to every single headline, every improvement, and every paycheck. That simmering tension makes unity incredibly difficult to maintain, and it is now threatening to spill over into the public eye. What began as a simple admiration for Caitlin Clark's impact has now evolved into a complex mix of envy, politics, and a fierce competition for control of the league's new net. The question question now is whether the WNBA can survive its own growing pains, or if internal jealousy will ultimately destroy the very progress that Clark helped to create. The strangest twist in this entire story is how quickly the initial admiration for Caitlin Clark curdled into outright resentment. Just a few months ago, she was being hailed as the savior of women's basketball, the rookie who single-handedly filled arenas, boosted ratings, and brought new sponsors to a struggling league. But as her popularity continued to grow, so did the list of people who were trying to claim a piece of her influence. Former players wanted recognition, current players wanted leverage, and the executives wanted to capitalize on her marketability. Somewhere in that frenzy, Caitlin stopped being a player and instead became a commodity. The signs were everywhere. Interviews that had once celebrated her game began to subtly shift their focus to how her fame should be used to benefit others. Articles began to frame her success as a collective victory, but the tone often suggested that everyone except Caitlin herself was entitled to the rewards. Even when she remained silent, her name was being used to push agendas, to defend pay demands, and to justify the struggles of generations past. And that is where the backlash took its most toxic turn. The very same media that had built her up now began to look for ways to humble her, magnifying every missed shot, every on-court emotion, and every rookie mistake. Some veteran players publicly minimized her accomplishments, saying that she still had a lot to prove. Others implied that her popularity came from a place of privilege, rather than from her actual performance. The narrative had shifted from Caitlin Clark the phenom to Caitlin Clark the problem, yet through it all, she never responded. There were no fiery posts on social media, no interviews defending herself, just a quiet, unwavering focus on her game. That silence has now become her greatest weapon. While others talk, she plays. While others negotiate, she inspires. But make no mistake, this moment will undoubtedly define the WNBA's future. If the league continues to attack its biggest draw, it risks alienating the very audience it has worked so hard to build. Caitlin Clark's story is not just about basketball anymore. It is about what happens when hero worship turns into envy, and how a league decides whether to protect its star or to feed off of her until there is nothing left. The WNBA now stands at a crossroads. What began as Caitlin Clark's meteoric rise to stardom has now exposed the deep fractures that exist within the league, between generations, between ideals, and between those who build and those who simply benefit. The former players want credit, the current stars want progress, and the fans just want the drama to stop. Yet amid all of the noise, one simple truth remains. Caitlin Clark did not create this tension, she merely revealed it. Whether the WNBA chooses to unite behind her success, or to let jealousy tear it apart, will determine not just its next season, but its very legacy in the annals of sports history.